Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unified Leadership Institute. I'm Christopher Hornick, President and CEO of HBSC Strategic Services. I'm a fellow at the Unified Leadership Institute, and I'm also the author of the last book of leadership. Today, I want you to picture a gathering of the finest minds in business strategy and organizational behavior, and among them, a luminary whose insights have reshaped the very essence of leadership. Today, it is my privilege to introduce you a man whose name resonates in boardrooms and classrooms alike, a trailblazer who has illuminated the darkest corners of corporate dynamics. His teachings are nothing short of transformative. He is an academic giant and a sage of strategy. I'm thrilled to present to you Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer from the hallowed halls of Stanford Graduate Business School, where he is a professor of organizational behavior. As an HBSC partner, I've had the distinct honor of working with some of the brightest minds here in Silicon Valley. Yet, when it comes to understanding the human elements of organizations, there is no one quite like Professor Pfeffer. Jeffrey and I met about a month ago at a political town hall for Andrew Yang in Palo Alto. Andrew Yang is actually the head of the Forward Party and has also run for president. After researching Jeffrey's massive body of work, and I do mean it is massive, he has been prolific and has been with Stanford since 1979, and has written some amazing books. His books, Leadership BS, Fixing Workplaces and Careers One Truth at a Time, The Knowing-Doing Gap, which I read many years ago, which is super valuable, Barriers to Implementing What We Know, The 7 Rules of Power, which basically is the basis of his class that he teaches at Stanford Business School, and a book on toxic workplaces called Dying for a Paycheck, another prolific work. It's clear that he has not only challenged conventional wisdom, but frequently shatters it. That's what encountering Jeffrey Pfeffer's work feels like discovering a hidden treasure chest of wisdom and insights. But Jeffrey's not just about brilliant academics. He's a provocateur, a champion of change, and a voice for the voiceless. His pioneering research has unveiled the often harsh realities of workplace dynamics, shedding light on the unspoken issues that affect us all. Through his work, we see the human cost of toxic workplace cultures, the subtle mechanisms of power at play, and the tremendous toll that they have on individuals and organizations. But what truly distinguishes Jeffrey is his unwavering dedication to the human aspects of management. He reminds us that behind every statistic and every strategic decision, every single profit margin, and every balance sheet lies a human story. Today, we have the privilege of listening to the wisdom of Professor Pfeffer. So without further ado, I present to you a luminary, a provocateur, and a beacon of change, Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer. Welcome, Jeffrey, to the Unified Leadership Podcast.
Chris, it is a pleasure to be with you, and I love the word provocateur.
That is awesome. Well, Jeffrey, it's wonderful having you here, and it's an honor. So, you've written a lot of books about power, how to get it, how to keep it, and the cost of having power. Fascinating work, and I have to say, I read probably about 4 of your books within the last 2 months, and absolutely amazing. And in many of your leadership books, you dispel many of the leadership myths and the apocryphal stories of leadership. There's a lot of pundits out there, Simon Sinek, Jim Collins, John Maxwell, who basically have one view of leadership, and you sort of take a counterintuitive approach, but I would say a very realistic approach to that. Can you talk a little bit about some of your favorite leadership myths and sort of the aspects that you dispel?
Sure. So first of all, I would point out that Jim Collins has endorsed some of my books. And one of the interesting things that Jim and I have discussed when he wrote Good to Great and talked about level 5 leaders, one of the things that he and I discussed was the fact that as they rose to senior ranks, they did not always behave as they did once they were in the CEO role. So I think one of the things that people need to pay attention to and be cognizant of is that what you want to do on the way up and what may get you to the top is different than how you want to behave when you're on top. So one of the myths, of course, of life, and one of the concepts that I absolutely detest is this idea of authenticity. Chris, I'm sure you are different with your significant other and with your children than you are with your colleagues, that you're different in different circumstances, depending upon, which we're going to get into later, the resource abundance that you face or resource scarcity. The idea that you are going to be the same person and behave the same in every single situation, I think, is not only inaccurate, it's actually probably harmful. So I think Jim and I discussed the fact that the road to the top is different than how you want to possibly behave once you're up there. So that is, I think, one thing. The other thing I think, which is clearly true, when you have a lot of power, one of the things that many people do with that power is they hire a ghostwriter and they write a book. And they write a book about not necessarily the truth of what they did on their climb to the top, but on how they want people to see them. I could give you some examples, of that. So, I think, it is people, and then they donate money to charity, and they do all kinds of things to basically burnish their reputations. But the people who know them, and I've done this with many, many of these famous, fancy people, and actually some of the people whose names you've already mentioned, it turns out the reality of how they behave is not necessarily what they say.
Yeah.
That shouldn't surprise you.
Sorry, good.
That shouldn't surprise you at all.
No, it doesn't surprise me. And I think everyone is sort of working on branding themselves. And, even when you get into sort of a position of power, you're very concerned about your reputation. And so a lot of the books are at sort of pretending that you're one thing to basically protect your brand and your reputation. So I totally see that. And that's actually one of the elements of power that you mentioned, basically looking at creating a great brand for yourself. So sometimes these books are actually a vehicle for doing that as well. One of the quotes I love from your book, it says, authenticity and the idea of authenticity basically gives people an excuse not to change, to not adapt, to instead be true to themselves. You need to be true to what other people around you need from you. This idea that you need to be authentic is insane. And so that's sort of classic. I love that paragraph that you wrote. And can you talk a little bit about authenticity? I know there's been tremendous number of works out there on authenticity. What's your view around that, if you could elaborate on that?
Sure. So I recommend that people read Adam Grant, the famous authors. He wrote a New York Times column some years ago. And the title of the column is, "Unless You're Oprah, Be Yourself is Terrible Advice." And he talks about the fact that that all of us have thoughts and feelings and whatever that we are better off hiding from other people. If your significant other asks you, do you love me as much as when you first met me 30 years ago? The correct answer is yes. Does this outfit make me look heavy? The correct answer is no. That, there was a study published years ago called Lying in Everyday Life, which says on average people lie twice a day, and they lie in many instances to maintain relationships. Human resources departments all the time don't go out to all the workers and say, by the way, we've graded you and on this curve, and your odds of getting promoted are zero. Because they'd have too much turnover. So, we do not necessarily disclose things 100% of the time to everybody. We try to manage relationships in ways that smooth out some of the rough edges.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things is sort of relationship capital that you actually accumulate inside an organization. And, you'll basically need to maintain some level of that. And a lot of that's just emotional intelligence. So I 100% agree with you. One thing you talk about is power, and I think your sort of your brand, like at Stanford is really sort of the power guy who basically knows everything there is to know about power and basically how to manage a career, because you give some great career advice. Why do you think it's so critical for MBAs in particular to understand and be proficient with power?
Well, I think not only MBAs, but I think everybody has this belief. Some people have associated this with being an immigrant or whatever, but people, I think, have this belief that their good work will speak for itself. If they do a good job, that will be sufficient. But it is not sufficient. First of all, your boss is busy doing their own thing, and they may not notice your good work. And secondly, what is good work may be defined differently by you or by other people. So therefore, I mean, and moreover, as you rise up in the organization, the people who aren't technically competent are already filtered out. The people who aren't willing to work hard are already filtered out. So as you rise up in the organization, political skills become more important because the other aspects of life, are you smart? Are you technically competent? Those have already been selected for. So when you're at a senior level in the organization, you're surrounded by smart people. You're surrounded by hardworking people. You're surrounded by people who know the business and the industry. So the differentiating factor becomes one's political skill.
Yes, no, I agree with you 100%. I think playing politics in organizations, that's sort of a survival skill. And if you really don't have that skill, you'll have many careers anyway today, because basically the tenure of people in organizations isn't lasting very long as it used to. But without that skill, I think it truly is your probability of survival is limited. And it was one of the questions, and I know that you get this question asked quite a bit. It's really around your 7 rules of power. Can you walk us through the 7 rules? And, really, it's interesting that the people that I see in power today, who are the most powerful, they obey these rules. And that's why I think it's so prevalent to and so important to basically have these out there for people to embrace.
Yeah, well, I thank you for asking that question, because I do love the book, The 7 Rules of Power. So the rule 1 is get out of your own way. I think we are often our own biggest obstacles to having power because we worry excessively about being liked. Many people suffer from what is called imposter syndrome. We don't believe we deserve the position that we have. We think we're like, at Stanford, people always believe that they're the admissions mistake, which of course they're not. If you don't have confidence in your own ability, other people will not as well. So I think you have to get out of your own way and be willing to do what it takes in order to be powerful. So that's rule 1. Rule 2 is break the rules. I think there is in finance the idea that there is a trade-off between risk and return. No risk, no return. That is true inside of organizations, and it's true for careers as well. If you play it safe and, color inside the lines, you are probably going to do okay, but you're not going to do great. You're not going to go up very high. The companies that reinvent industries and the individuals who reinvent their careers are people who are willing and able to see the essential truths and to get beyond conventional wisdom. And that's true, I think, for both company strategy and career strategy. Rule 3 is to show up with power. We respond mostly to how people sound and how they look. The least important is the aspect, is the content of what they say, believe it or not. And so that I think is very important. Rule 4 is to build a brand. Just as branding is important for products and companies, branding is important for individuals. Individuals need to have a story that they tell, which integrates their life experiences with what they've done and what they hope to do. And if you think about, you think of Barack Obama, for instance, he has a brand. The brand began as a community organizer, somebody interested in promoting social justice, which is, I think one of the things that characterized, his presidency. I mean, there's all this discussion about Obamacare, but what Obamacare was really about was providing the same health care to every American that the privileged now get. So, so build a brand. Rule 5 is network relentlessly. Most people spend too little time on building social relationships with influential others. If leadership is getting things done through other people, the more other people you know, the better off you're going to be in your ability to get things done. Rule 6 is to use your power, because the more things you are able to accomplish, the more power you will have, the more people will want to work with you. And rule 7, which unfortunately is true, is that once you are powerful and successful, how you got there won't matter. People will forgive or forget or both. And you see this, by the way, you see this with successful football coaches or successful sports coaches, where oftentimes, the fact that they engage in a little recruiting violation here or there doesn't seem to matter that much. We forgive and we forget. So success excuses a lot of things.
So Jeffrey, one of the things that comes to mind around rule number 7. First of all, I love all the rules, and the people that I've actually seen rise up here in Silicon Valley, they embrace, sort of to the highest levels, they embrace all 7 of these, and so I think these are spot on. One of the sayings, I think, is that if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough, and and so I think there's a morality component to a lot of the things you talk about, but there's also human nature here, and human nature in a lot of cases trumps a lot of other things, and so I think that these rules are spot on. One of the questions that I had is that it's obviously 7 is a great number. It's a lucky number, obviously in playing dice and craps. One of the questions, what was the 8th and what was the 9th rules of power that didn't sort of make the cut here that you thought about, but then you said, they're probably not the most important, but yet they still may be helpful to people.
Well, I think there are probably a bunch of things that didn't make the cut. I think one rule of power is, if you think about the people who are the most powerful and the most successful, they have, I think, a set of interrelated personal qualities. Ambition would be one. Hard work would be another. Determination, persistence, and resilience would be other qualities that I think characterize people who are powerful and successful. Everybody's going to face setbacks, so you need to be resilient. A lot of people have great ambition, but don't want to do very much about it. So I think the ethic or the ethos of hard work and having energy is another. So I think the rules of power around the personal qualities that will make you powerful that did not make the book. Mostly because I think to some extent they're discussed elsewhere, and you can almost take them for granted. That you have to have a good work ethic. You have to be resilient in the face of setbacks. I'm sure in your own career you've had things that didn't go perfectly, and one of the things that's made you successful is your ability to overcome adversity.
No, actually, in my career, Jeffrey, everything went absolutely perfect, as planned, as usual. So you're exactly right. No, you have to deal with adversity. You need resilience, persistence. And if you don't have a work ethic or drive, you're not even at the table, right? So, you're absolutely right. And I think those are actually great, sort of the 8th and 9th rules of power. So maybe there'll be an addendum in your book eventually, but still fantastic work. I love the book, and absolutely amazing. Along those lines, can you give us 1 or 2 exercises that you do with the students at Stanford, the graduate students at Stanford Business School, around power, how to make them more powerful?
Sure. Well, I can tell you several things. So the first and most important thing I do in my class, both the online version of the class, which is part of our LEAD program, and the on-campus version of the class, is I give people a doing power project. Because as you know, and as everybody knows, the best way to learn something is to use it. So if I teach you French and you never speak French, in about 5 minutes, you're going to forget all the French that you learned. If you learn to play the French horn and you don't actually practice the French horn, the skill will abate. Similarly, if you learn the rules of power and do not use them, they won't stick with you. So I tell people to do a doing power project, to take some context that may be consequential, or for that matter, maybe just fun, and see what they can do using these 7 rules of power, using what we learn in the class, put it into practice. See if they can get rid of an enemy. See if they can build their brand. See if they can expand their network. See if at the end of, a few weeks, they can have significantly changed their position in the world. And oftentimes the doing power projects are quite successful. So that is probably the most important thing they can do. The other thing I have them do, which is a good exercise, is to try to do an elevator pitch for yourself. People do elevator pitches for their companies all the time. An elevator pitch for yourself, which is this issue of personal branding. Who are you? What do you stand for? And how does your life experience integrate with what you are doing and what you're trying to do? So, and so I think that's another good exercise to figure out, what makes you unique and distinct and uniquely qualified to do the job that you're doing or that you seek to do.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, that definitely goes along with the, create a powerful brand concept, and sort of your actions basically create that louder than the words you speak sometimes. So I totally agree with that. One of the questions that had come up from one of my colleagues was really around Niccolo Machiavelli. So Niccolo Machiavelli, he was actually sort of a philosopher and a sort of political consultant to the Medici in the 15th century and Renaissance. And, he talked about a lot about deception, treachery, and breaking the rules. And it was very interesting to see that sort of breaking the rules is number 2 on your list. Have the rules of power really changed much since the time of Niccolo Machiavelli's writing? And what did Niccolo miss, if anything, in his writings?
Well, Niccolo, of course, was a philosopher, not a social scientist. So what he missed was the empirical evidence to support his insights. But beyond that, I would say the rules of power are basically unchanging, and they are surprisingly constant across organizational cultures as well, and across national cultures. And that's because people are people. I mean, the fundamental rules of social psychology, which underlie a lot of this, the idea that people are assessed along 2 dimensions, warmth and competence, which are often seen as negatively related. The idea that people prefer to associate with others who are similar to themselves. Similarity is a basis of interpersonal attraction. I could go down a long list. These are rules that apply everywhere because all humans face basically the same existential issue, which is distinguishing friend from foe and figuring out who's going to win. So right. People are attracted to power around the world. People prefer people who are similar to themselves around the world. It is Susan Fiske, a social psychologist at Princeton, finds that warmth and competence are the dimensions by which we judge other people. So many of the rules of behavior are quite similar because they are actually quite functional in terms of figuring out how to succeed. In this world, you want to know who your friends are, and you want to understand who's going to win so you can align yourself with those people. So yes, the rules of power are quite constant, both over time and across cultures, much to people's surprise.
Yeah, I think that is surprising. I think people think that different ethnicities or different countries would actually have different rules, when in fact, sort of the human nature of survival have basically propagated these levels across the globe, right? Yeah. Across all humans.
Yeah, and the rules will. I mean, the behaviors will manifest themselves differently. I mean, obviously, if I say to you, almost everybody in the world wears clothing, yes, of course, that's true. The clothing looks different. The decoration is different. Everybody in the world, most cultures have jewelry and ornaments. Now, the ornaments will look different, but the purpose of the ornaments, the fundamental idea of ornamentation is the same. Though the manifestation of that will obviously be different depending upon where you are geographically. And similarly with power. So the manifestations will differ, even though the fundamental elements of what they're about are the same.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know you actually sort of pointed out some individuals who had thought that sort of the Asian culture might have been slightly different, like in terms of being humble and not sort of adhering to these laws of power. And I think you did a good job of sort of explaining that, in terms of it may look slightly different, but it pretty much conforms to the same laws of power.
Yes, I think that's right.
So, one of the other questions I had for you is that why do you think people are so uncomfortable with power? Specifically positional power. Obviously, there's sort of ethical power, there's personal power, but when it comes to positional power, why do you think that people have this level of discomfort? Is it something that we've been trained to, reject, or is it something that's just inherently uncomfortable in our psychology?
Well, I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. I can tell you my colleague Deborah Grunfeld has teaches a course and has written a book called Acting with Power. And she basically addresses the question that you've asked with the following insight, which is many people, I think, ask themselves, what gives me the right to have dominion or power over others? So hierarchy is on the one hand ubiquitous. I mean, you fish and chimpanzees and gorillas and every species, including obviously humans, are hierarchical. There's hierarchy is ubiquitous in our lives. There's only one president. There's only one school superintendent in each school district. There's only one CEO for the most part. There's only one, there's only one president of Stanford University, et cetera. There's only one department chair, one dean of the medical school, et cetera. So hierarchy is ubiquitous. We wish it weren't so. My friend, the late Harold Levitt, wrote a bunch of stuff on this and talks about how for 50 years we've hoped that the hierarchy will go away. It hasn't. So we are, I think, uncomfortable with the idea of hierarchy. I think we are uncomfortable with the idea that some people have power over other people. We would like to believe that the world is more egalitarian than that. And that makes, I think, people uncomfortable with the idea of power, because we want to believe that we're all just in this together. We're all the same. We're all whatever, even though, of course, all you need to do is open your eyes and you see that that is not true.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of ingrained a lot of in sort of schools and teachings and things like that about equality, when in fact there are differences, which I think a lot of people sort of gloss over. In my book, like I basically, in the last book of leadership, I actually postulate that leadership is really about sort of distributing abundance and also about allocating scarcity. And really this notion of people writing about inspirational leadership, that's when there is a great deal of abundance, but no one really wants to focus on sort of the leadership capabilities that are necessary. I think you focus on that when there is allocating scarcity. So I guess the real question there is that, do you sort of differentiate those two times in terms of how leaders need to behave from a social scientist perspective?
Well, so first of all, power and politics become more prominent in times of scarcity. And when everybody can get everything that they want, then there's no issue of allocation. And so allocation becomes more important in times of scarcity, and politics becomes more intense in times of scarcity. In the 2008 financial crisis, I had a bunch of VCs call me and ask me to recommend for them essentially what I would call organizational marriage counselors. People to help them, get along better. As one of them said to me, when the money was rolling in, I could tolerate the bad behavior of some of my partners. When the money stopped rolling in, their bad behavior got on my nerves more. And I think that is a natural phenomenon where you're, when there's plenty of resources, everybody gets what they want, and I can excuse this, that, and the other thing. Is at times of stress and scarcity when the political skills become, I think, much more important.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think that, obviously heading into an election cycle, I think, the political powers that be, typically try to make the economy as good as possible about 6 months before the election, right? So there's kind of a manipulation that goes on at the Fed, and interest rates and prices of gas and everything like that is sort of manipulated to remain in power, which is also of interest. And the other question I was going to ask you is that, so, obviously this class on power at Stanford, what is it called? The Path to Power?
That's it.
Yeah. The Path to Power is one of the most popular classes that you teach, and it focuses on sort of being a powerful individual. Why is there not a class on sort of wisdom at Stanford? And if there was, what would that look like?
Well, I'm not sure what the word wisdom means. I understand what the word power means because I can measure it. I'm not sure how to measure the idea of wisdom. I think wisdom actually comes probably with experience, and wisdom probably comes mostly through having setbacks. I think the most, Reed Hastings, who runs or is now co-running, I guess, Netflix, said that, his prior CEO job prior to Netflix, he would have fired himself. I think you learn a lot. The famous San Francisco politician, Willie Brown, lost the first time he ran for the assembly, lost the first time he ran for speaker. I think you learn from setbacks, you learn from adversity, potentially. You learn what works, you learn what doesn't work, and also setbacks and adversity help you develop your experience. So therefore, I think wisdom comes from having those experiences, having things that don't work, having failures. You see this, by the way, in the biotech world all the time, where failure is expected. If you're going to push the frontiers of science, not every drug development program is going to work. If you're going to push the frontiers of whatever, if you're going to build an airplane, you're going to put that airplane in a simulator, and you're going to stress test all of its components to make sure that they work, under all circumstances. And I think similarly, for individuals, wisdom comes from having a set of reversals and difficulties that cause you to understand, number one, your own capacity to survive. In order to love, you have to have had a broken heart and understand that you can survive it. And similarly, I think wisdom comes from understanding that you can survive setbacks and figuring out how to persist in the face of adversity.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. Wisdom does come over time and, sort of with the scars on your back. So I think that is actually a good characterization of, how to achieve wisdom. And it is sort of into your career. I guess after you've been in your career 20 years, you have an entirely different perspective than you do at the beginning. So that's really great. So I wanted to go through like a little bit of exercise here as a little fun exercise. And, if we take two leaders, leader A and leader B, and both are equally competent, I was going to ask you a question about which rises to the top in most organizations. And so leader A could be characterized as altruistic, a servant leader, humble, telling the truth most of the time, often very authentic, and also vulnerable, sort of like having vulnerability. And then leader B is sort of the narcissist, self-interested, maybe self-promoting, using selective deception, inauthentic sometimes, and also coming across as being invincible. Which leader do you think actually rises to the top of that organization typically?
Probably leader B. We have a wonderful example. His name is Donald Trump, who has essentially all of the qualities that you just talked about. And somebody is going to say, well, he lost the election in 2020, which of course he did. Though I would point out that he lost that election but he still got the second most number of votes in American electoral history, and he was elected president. And so I think actually the most successful leader is someone who combines the qualities, the two sets of qualities that you talked about. If you are completely self-effacing if you are completely out for other people, then you will not really be sufficiently self-promoting and ambitious for yourself. If you are on the other hand, too ambitious and too self-promoting, you will have, I think actually Trump illustrates this pretty well, you won't have many colleagues to support you in times of difficulty. So I think you need a combination of those qualities. And like everything else, it's a happy medium. So if you have no sodium in your body, you will die. And if I give you too much salt, salt is in fact a poison and you'll die. So when they measure your blood chemistry in a standard blood panel test, you will see that there's a range, and you don't want to be too high and you don't want to be too low on potassium or sodium or any of these other chemicals in your body. By the way, this is true for cholesterol. If you have too much cholesterol, you'll have heart disease. By the way, if you have no cholesterol at all, your cells won't function. So I think this idea that, something is good, therefore more of it is better, even more of it is even better, even more. No, I think there is a balance and a moderation for everything. So take rule 2. You want to break the rules, but you don't want to break the rule. You don't want to break every rule all the time.
Right.
So you want to network, but you don't want to network every 100% of the time. You want to network enough to build the relationships that will permit you to get things done, but you also want to do things besides networking. So all of these things, I think, come with the idea that there is an optimal amount of them. And the reason why I promulgate them is that most people don't do them enough. Most people conform too much, they don't break the rules. Most people do not spend sufficient time on building social relationships. So and so on down the line. So that would be my answer to that.
No, and I think that you extremely well put, and I definitely like the analogies when it comes to salt and other sort of nutrients and things in our body. That's actually a great analogy. One of the things what you speak to is really sort of the adaptive leadership and sort of operational range, right? Having that ability to sort of modulate your behavior, which is essential for, especially in modern leadership when we're on so much, that type of capability is absolutely critical. So I love the analogy. The other question that I was going to mention to you is that, you spend some time in your books looking at sort of what the leadership industrial complex basically puts out, like in terms of materials and basically you made a couple comments in several of your books and articles about how that's less than helpful for leaders today or leaders in general, regardless of the context in which they work. Where is the failing really there happening? And, why is that really happening?
So I think we evaluate leadership mostly by giving people what some people will call happy sheets to fill out. Did you enjoy the experience? I still remember being in Australia and somebody said, giving me trouble at a dinner and said, well, Simon Sinek, gave this speech, and at the end of the speech, it got a standing ovation from 3,000 people. I said, if that's your measure of effectiveness, get the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones will get a standing ovation from 50,000 people. I think we have confused. Let me back up. So some of my friends call this edutainment, a combination of education and entertainment. We have substituted entertainment for education. And the two are not the same. If I tell you stuff that you want to hear, you may like it, you may think it's pleasant, you may think it's great, but you probably you like it because you already agree with it. Education is about challenging people's assumptions and beliefs. Education is about getting them to think. The late Peter Drucker was fond of saying, thinking is hard work, which is why so few managers do it. So education is about telling you things that cause you to question what you think you know. My friend Bob Sutton is fond of quoting an old philosopher, I think it was Nelson Algren, who said, the things that get you into trouble are not what you don't know. The things that get you into trouble are the things you think you know that turn out to be not so, turn out to be not true. And so education really is a process of getting people to critically evaluate using the best evidence what is true and what isn't. And the leadership industry has been mostly, for the most part, in the business of telling inspirational stories that sometimes are truthful and sometimes are not, to motivate people and make them feel good about themselves and about the speaker. But,
right. No, I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that sort of the inspiration sells, and when people pick up a leadership book, maybe they're not interested in sort of the reality. They really want it to be more of a fictional book, even though it's a nonfiction book. So I think a lot of people are writing, fictional nonfiction books, right? So it's kind of funny.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. And many of them are called autobiographies.
I love it. I totally love it. I was going to ask you a question. So why is not leadership actually taught in the majority of high schools and undergrad situations? Because, this material is helpful regardless of what, position you are at in your life. I mean, this is just sort of like a life skill. Why do you think it's not taught at the high school or undergraduate level?
I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. But I think the premise of your question is completely correct. I've had people tell me that my classes help them in things outside of their professional life. It's helped them in their personal life. It's helped them in their interpersonal relationships with their significant other. I've had people tell me, say very much the same thing that you've said, that it is really that the power, because power is really ubiquitous in social life. It is a very important skill to have, but so I agree with the premise of the question. Why it's not taught more, I have no idea. By the way, my elective on power is diffused somewhat throughout business schools, but there are plenty of business schools that don't have a class on power at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's unique. It's certainly a unique offering, and your perspective on it from your books is very unique, I think, in the industry. So I thank you for that. One of the questions that you and I talked about last time we spoke was really around sort of the balanced leadership scorecard notion, and that basically leaders should be evaluated on multiple things. And basically, if we're really not evaluating them across many dimensions, it's really hard to say whether it's really good leadership or bad leadership. And, maybe this evaluation of leadership is only valid in the rear view mirror, so to speak. What's your thoughts around sort of having a balanced scorecard for evaluating leaders or understanding leadership better?
Well, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of that. I think multiple dimensions are better because I think leaders have many impacts. You think about it, they have impacts on the bottom line, and even the bottom line could be measured. Is it the bottom line today? Is it the bottom line, 5 years from now? Is it the bottom line measured by return on sales or return on assets or whatever? And then you can ask, beyond economic performance, what is the effect of the leader on the organization's durability? Collins and Porras, built to last, gets to that. The idea of, have you built an organization which is not only good for today, but sustainable into the future? And the sports analogy, can you not only sprint, can you do a marathon? I think that's another dimension. And of course, the leader's effects on the people who work in their organization is another, I think, very important dimension. Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole other topic. And your book, Dying for a Paycheck, is certainly another topic I'd love to cover with you. One question I have, just to stay on the leadership thing for one more time, one more question. If you look at sort of the role models in leadership today, who are sort of your two favorite leaders, one female, one male, they could be throughout history, that you really look to and you would say that characterizes, exceptional leadership? Who are sort of the role models that you would sort of look at?
Well, that's an interesting question because I don't think about it that much. But when I think about, for instance, leaders of workplaces, one of my role models would be Amir Dan Rubin, who ran One Medical until it was sold to Amazon. He's still running it for the moment. Ran Stanford Healthcare before that, which is Stanford Hospital and Clinics. Was the chief operating officer at UCLA. He, to me, I think, has a wonderful mix of both, pragmatism and also, building organizations which are effective and which take care of their people, and building organizations which are vision oriented. So he's somebody that I certainly think is a very skillful leader, and it'll be interesting to see what he does next after the Amazon purchase of One Medical, which he ran for about 7 years. So I think he's an extraordinarily effective leader. I also admire tremendously Deborah Liu, whose house I think I met you at.
Yes.
Who was a very senior executive at Facebook, was a senior executive at eBay and PayPal before that, and then has now gone on to become CEO of Ancestry.com. As a Asian American woman, she had to overcome, first of all, a lot of prejudice where she grew up in the South, and overcome a lot of reticence to put herself out there and to be ambitious and to understand that she could, in fact, be an effective CEO. So I really like her balance, again, the balance between, being a caring person, being, by the way, a very religious person. She wears a cross. I mean, she's not just a Christian, but she's a very devoted and devout Christian, but also who understands the pragmatics, having worked at Meta, Facebook, she would understand those very well, to understand the pragmatics of needing to take credit for projects that she ran, which is a story she tells in my class and in her book, and needing to advocate not just for herself, but when you don't advocate for yourself and you're in a leadership position, you are in fact not advocating for your team.
Right.
And so, so this wonderful balance. So those are two people that come to mind when you ask the question.
I love it. That's actually great two individuals, I guess examples of what you talk about in your book, and just sort of like this balanced scorecard for leadership. I think that's a wonderful concept. The other element that I was going to ask you as the last question, because I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, and I appreciate you being so generous. So you've contributed so much to business, leadership, social science in your career. But what would you consider to be your magnum opus or your greatest achievement? Have you created it, or are you in the process of creating it, or do you see that in your future?
Well, I hope I'm still creating it. But time will tell. The next book I'm working on is a book on how employers could fix the U.S. healthcare system, which Lord knows needs fixing. So we'll see.
No, I think I welcome that. I think you and I had a conversation earlier about healthcare and how it is certainly ailing, and is basically a major cause of issues in our society, even in sort of the healthcare insurance market as well. So yes, that's another topic. But Jeffrey, I want to say thank you, and this has been wonderful chatting with you and catching up. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and hear the wisdom that you impart on the world and on your students. Fantastic, and I look forward to a future conversation with you.
Yes. And it's been a pleasure being with you. And thank you so much for having such a wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Jeffrey. We'll talk soon.
All right. Be well. Bye.
Thank you.